In the previous lesson, we created a form that allows us to create a new store and save the store to database. Let's take a look at how it works. First, I'm just going to show you what I have in the database right now for store. I only have one camera store called Ming's Camera Store. I'm going to create a new store called New Store. And at a store, it says here successfully saved. Now let's take a look at our database. Sure enough, a new store has been created. So I created two view functions here. Right? So one /store and another one /store form. So all this view function does is render store.html, which is a new file that I've created. The only thing it does is it extends the layout. On top of that, it displays a form. It's a very simple form. It only has one input, name, and a button to submit the form. And this form will get submitted to this URL, right? So when a user clicks the submit button, the data will get sent to this URL. Once again, I'm using Flask's URL helper. I highly recommend everyone to use URL helpers when possible. So let's take a look at the form that was generated. So I'm going to inspect element, and I'll just look at the form's action. Whenever a user clicks on add a store, the data gets submitted to /store form, which is the second view function that you have seen here, store form. So this store form essentially extracts out the data from the form. I'm only interested in the name input field. All right, create a new store object and then save it. If it saves successfully, we would redirect back to store. All right, so in this case here. Otherwise, it would render the template store.html. Now, it's very important to know what methods return. So in this case, a save method returns 0 if it fails to save anything, or 1 if it succeeds in saving at least one object. So I know that 1 is truthy, right? So if it saves successfully, we'll do this. If it fails, it would be a 0, and if 0 is if falsy, right? So if it's false, it would render template. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between redirect and render template as well. To do that, we would need to understand how the web works. Every time when we go to our URL bar on our browser, we type some URL and we hit enter, it's making a GET request. Whenever a user, right, in this case this user, opens up a browser and keys in the URL, let's say /store, this would then make a network request to our server. All right, so let's say this was our server. Our server would then, check, okay, this person is asking for store, and then it would match this app.root here. This code will then execute. So when this code executes, it would render template store.html. So essentially, it would return the user a HTML file. Right? In this case, it is store.html. Okay. Now, what happens when the user submits the form? So when the user fills in the form and then clicks on the submit button, right, clicks here, the browser will then make a network request to, once again, our server, right? The address that it sends to will be based on the form action. So the form action, if you recall, was store form. So it matches store form, and this bit of code will then run. So this code runs. If it saves successfully, it would redirect to URL for store. So essentially what it's doing is that it's telling the browser, okay, I want you to redirect to store. So now the browser gets the request and is being instructed to redirect to store. So it makes a new request to the server to /store. Okay, and then now it's a whole new HTTP request response cycle. So it makes a request to store. Now this will run, and then our goal is to render template HTML store. So the server prepares store.html and returns it to the browser. Essentially, that's how the web works. Now let's talk a little bit about the difference between render template and redirect, and why might we want to redirect in this case, and why might we want to render in this case. So to do that, I'm going to demonstrate to you if, let's say, instead of redirecting to store, we would just render store. So I'm just going to do this. I'm going to comment this out and return render template. All right. Now I'm going to submit the form once again, so I'm just going to start afresh. Okay, create a new store, store 2. Click add a store. It says successfully saved. And I'm back at this page. But notice the URL here. It says store form (name equals to store plus 2. Okay, compare the difference we had when we were using redirect. Okay, so I'm going to start from scratch again. Visit /store, create a new store, so store 3, click add a store. Notice the difference? Now, what are the implications? Okay, to do that, I'm just gonna do this once again. So I'll visit /store, create yet another store, so store 4. This URL is store form (name equals to store 4. Now, let's say if I open a new browser, okay, let's say a private browser, and I key in this URL, what do you think would happen? It's going to make a new request to store form with the argument name, and it would try to perform the exact same thing once again. Right? We're getting integrity error, right? Duplicate key value for store name. It's essentially doing this once again. And that's not the behavior that you want. And that's why it's so common to see that, when you have successfully saved something to the database, whether it's creating a new object or updating a new object or deleting an object, after you have successfully done it, you would want to redirect instead of render a template. Rendering template in this case makes sense because the action failed, right? And we want to bring the user back to the form so that he or she can read some validation error messages and correct the form so that he or she can submit once again.